International trade. It's a very interesting subject, international trade. At the end of the day, it's been going on for a very long time. I can recall one piece of international trade from, I guess, history, 1200 BC. We know that, for example, Egypt was very much into the Bronze Age, and they needed to make their bronze, they needed copper and they needed tin. They got their copper from a place we now call Cyprus, and they got their tin, most of their tin they got from the mountains of what is now called Afghanistan. And these were brought together by various caravans from various, I guess they were city-state nations as they were, and that was some aspect of international trade. However, around about 1200 BC to 1150 BC, there was a huge complication, because we actually had a massive increase in temperatures, causing a number of deaths there, causing many of those nations to get into difficulties, and the trade fell over. As a result of that, that became the end of Egypt's main dependency upon bronze at that particular stage. Some say that is the beginning of the end of the Bronze Age. There were other times in history where trade took place. As Europe froze around about approximately 2,000 years ago, a bit over 2,000 years ago, and Rome was flexing its muscles because it was needing to get grain as Europe began to freeze up, and they were unable to grow the grain in the European lands which they had captured. And of course, it was a long trek to get their grain at the time from Egypt. But across the way, not very far, in North Africa was Carthage, and they had plenty of grain there. Their circumstances were far better, and they had a very good grain growing area. And so we actually had the Carthaginian Wars, because Carthage was unprepared or unwilling to trade on good terms with Rome at that stage. Many times in world trade we've seen some aspects of conflict. Of course, a part of the colonisation of seemingly underdeveloped or seemingly perhaps uninhabited worlds by many of the Europeans was really about trying to secure raw materials from these places. Some they wanted the timber, some they wanted other raw materials which they dug out of the ground, various mined materials. Some places what they did is they were able to utilise the farming area and to get hold of the farmed products that they needed back home in Europe. And I guess you might say this is a part of the colonisation of Australia, was about the fact that there was a remote place there where there was a couple of things that could happen. They could get rid of some prisoners that were there, they could use them for labour in this far off country, and to be able to get some material back for what they needed in their factories there to produce various goods for the people back home in England. Now, this is the whole basis of a fair bit of trade. We also have, in the more modern times, we have some issues about trade that were problematical in 1937. Japan was in the middle of its conflicts with China and Korea and all of that. And as those particular wars were going on, in 1937, the United States and Britain and her allies, they just dried up the trade of steel and oil to Japan, and that created pressure. This is one of the reasons why Japan entered the war. in 1942 with the United States, and was very much prepared to sign a pact with Germany at that particular stage in dealing with this whole situation. So at the conclusion of the war, there was the establishment of the United Nations, which was supposed to be a pathway to continue with world peace. And so to cement the world peace, recognising that trade was often a point of conflict between people groups and between nations. So they actually had what was called the GATT agreement. That was the general agreement on trade and tariffs. What that was all about was to try and reduce tariffs, reduce restrictions that there was in various aspects of trade, to make trade a bit more freer. And that particular agreement had there was many meetings about that on different occasions, and that agreement of that went up to 1993, when the World Trade Organization was established in its stead. Now, the World Trade Organization is supposed to be an umpire, as it were, of international trade and stuff like that, to try and, again, impose peaceful sort of trade arrangements. Now, within that particular World Trade Organization, nations have, through that, registered various free trade agreements. Now, free trade agreements have been the vehicle of recent years which has been popularised around the place. Now, the problem we have with all of these is some of the add-on effects of these free trade agreements. The add-on effects are, not only is it the fact that they're able to trade goods and services to one nation to another, but also I guess the thing is that what happens, it allows investment into other countries. Now, as I have said in the past many times, I've explained this before on several occasions, on several videos, is that it is okay to have foreign investment in a country, in a different, some foreign investment coming to Australia is okay, providing that the foreign investor does not, in fact, have a controlling interest. The controlling interest becomes a problem. That's when they start demanding more and more of the host country, and where more and more is being taken away. And that becomes a serious problem. Now, one of the things we do know, for example, that as far as the investment in Australia is concerned, because of these free trade agreements, there have been many things in this country that have been taken over by foreign investors. You see, all of this was supposed to be about doing one thing. That was to make the world more prosperous, so that all economics, the whole worldwide, was going to be more prosperous, and it was also going to facilitate a greater emphasis on peace. Well, in fact, that hasn't really been the case. While we haven't had yet another war, as it were, there has been many conflicts around the place. And in fact, there's been a whole stack of them that have occurred. And some of those have been occurring because of the fact of oil, people wanting oil from the Middle East and stuff like that. There's been a lot of those conflicts. And of course, during this particular crisis that we're in at the moment, the COVID-19 situation, we actually have one of those countries where, in fact, this COVID-19 seems to have begun, that is China. We have them threatening to do various things to countries that wish to have an inquiry into whether or not there was a correct process in regard to, once the discovery of that there was a health issue, and to what they actually did after that, as to whether they acted appropriately. And so we actually have these threats from this particular country. Not only that, we also found that because of all of the removal of so much of the manufacturing in this country, because of all of that had occurred, one of the problems that we found with it was the fact that we were finding ourselves shortchanged on some of the goods that we needed, and particularly health goods that we particularly needed, like, for example, respirators, which we didn't produce. But fortunately, we had a couple of businesses here that was capable of tooling up very quickly to be able to do that. What this has shown us is the vulnerabilities. Now, while there are many good things that I suppose all this could work towards, and I mean, a byproduct of having world peace, that would be tremendous. But you see, the trouble is you cannot impose world peace, or you can't impose peace on anybody realistically, because at the end of the day, the thing that creates peace is when we are unified in our purpose, in all of that we are, in our very being. And of course, one of the problems is that in our world today, outside of, I guess, the Christian faith, we do not find very much about how people are able to get on well with each other. There is, we speak about it all, and even within the church there has obviously been lots of conflicts as well. But the thing is that the key to it all is to repair the hearts of people, so that we are not trying to grab things for our stuff, where we actually consider other people before ourselves. If we fail to do that, we can't really have effective world peace. We don't have peace in our country. Our people themselves are not at peace with each other. We have so much violence on the rise. We have so many things on the rise which demonstrates the degree of violence. We have those people involved in business, in high-ranking positions in business. We find that they are not satisfied with their level of remuneration, even though it's measured in millions of dollars, and they still find the need to go and to pilfer money from other people by various schemes. Hence, we needed to have the financial inquiry in Australia. And even though we had that and we found there was many things wrong that were occurring, we didn't deal with the issue at hand. And the issue is at hand is the attitude within the heart of man. That was the problem that hasn't been dealt with. You see, when we look at the whole thing together, the only way that we can actually really ascertain a good and wholesome trade is when we as people are capable of dealing well with each other. Until then, we need to, as a nation, we need our governments to defend our nation, to defend our jobs, to defend everything. We have in this country far too many people who are unemployed. We have far too many people who are underemployed. We have far too many people who are on pensions and living a very poor life because of the value of the pension. We have all of these figures that they can come up with about how wonderful and prosperous Australia is, but we still have people in Australia living below the poverty line, as there is in other places, because what we have done, in all of what we've done, we've allowed these huge multinational businesses to actually take over and control and manage things in other parts of the world. And we call it free trade. But at the end of the day, what we are doing is we are taking the labour of another person at the cheapest possible price to produce the products that we want in other parts of the world and take them away to those other parts of the world. And in the middle of the transaction of all of that, those people who move the goods and services, those things who actually run those businesses, all of those people are taking the cream. And the rest of the people, what are they doing? They are barely eking out a living from all of the dust that is settled from that particular process. You see, all of these wonderful organisations, supposedly, they talk about all that they're able to do, but they don't know how to deal with the one thing that stops it all. That's the greed within the heart of man, the selfishness within the heart of man. That has to be dealt with. But until then, we are far better off to make sure that our government protects our people. And to do that, we need to protect our borders. Free trade isn't the answer. Our trade needs to be on a balanced basis where we can be free to decide if we wish to trade or if we don't wish to trade. Effective trade is exactly the same as the business between the country, a person having a farm in the country and needing to get the goods from the town or the city. The excess things that he produces on his farm, he will sell for the best price he can, so that he can purchase those goods and services that he does not have on his farm that he needs to utilise. In that way, we need to also trade with others. So we need to be able to produce those things that we need in this country, that we need as much as we're able to. And that which is excessive, we can trade to others, and we can sell them to others, and we can buy things in that we find are difficult, or in fact we cannot produce, or we cannot supply in whatever way it is. That's what we need to do, and not to allow other people to come and to use all of our resources and to take all of our resources away, and to do what they need to do to them to manufacture products with cheap labour to bring them back to this country. Every person needs to be treated with dignity, with honour and with respect. And unfortunately, the way our trade is at the moment isn't doing a good job. And the fact that this whole system of this world trade that we have today is supposed to try and stop conflict. Well, I'm sorry, the conflict is very much there still. It may not be seeing all countries at war all the time, but we do know that we actually have, and we just have to read through the deaths of the Australian servicemen in the places that they are involved. We know that there are continuing wars around the place. We also know that with this, the more the borders are open to whatever happens, it is greater freedom, where illegal substances can be taken from one country to another, and hence the scourge of the horrid drug trade and the horror that it reaps upon the lives of so many people, not only in this country, but in all countries in the world. Yes, while trade is a good thing to do, the way that we do it and the reason we do it need to be re-evaluated. What we need to trade needs to be re-evaluated. What we need to produce in this country needs to be re-evaluated. And we need to make sure that in all that we think, do and say in regard to trade and in regard to production of material, that we make sure we primarily look after our people. We must look after our people first. That's the first responsibility of government, is to look after the people of Australia, not some other place. I'm Milton Kane, Christian Democratic Party. Thank you.